Good morning, friends. Good evening. Hello. Welcome back to a 1D10T Does Stuff. The 1D10T in charge is me, Trevor Stewart, 1308. And we will be reading from Inflamed, Deep Medicine and the Anatomy of Injustice by Rupa Maurya and Raj Patel, and discussing this today. We are well over halfway through the book. Well, we're not well over, but we're over halfway through the book. We're approaching 2/3 of the way. Our Tuesday streams are pretty charged. The purpose of the Tuesday streams is to gain that word all of a sudden escaped me. Context for to gain context for something that has been observed, and that has been that marginalized people face, at best, indifference from, and at worst, harm from the medical institutions in the United States. More specifically, black women, I believe, face a clear and present danger from the mental and emotional health and behavioral health institutions in America. When I started this project a couple of years ago, it's because of something that I had witnessed. But now, as we go through this, I've noticed a desire to change on the part of the emotional and behavioral health structures. I've also noticed a desire to keep change from occurring, coming from the socio-political machinations of the conservative forces in America. When I started this, I thought that one of the things that I had witnessed, and I'm pretty sure I had witnessed it, and I'm pretty sure it's still going on. I haven't done the footwork to find the proof. I'm sure it's there. I just don't know how to do that. Is that there's a pipeline from local emotional health emergency rooms to clinics, specifically to certain behavioral health clinics, and that pipeline is driven by money, targets the most marginalized of us, and once in is very hard to get out of. It seems to be cyclical in that the clinic itself doesn't do a whole lot of good and manages to do some harm before they release a person, making it hard for that person then to trust any help they may reach out for in the future, and thereby landing them in crisis in the emergency room again, where they're denied their rights, their autonomy and sent back to the clinic. And all of this, I am not certain that I can come up with the proof that this pipeline exists. Just that I'm not certain that I can come up with the proof that there is a for-profit pipeline, including the legal system and the local incarceral industry. However, I do know that once you are in the legal system here, it is very hard to get out of it. I have to watch what I'm doing out in public at all times because I have a history in the legal system. Cops are running my plates all the time, just going, oh, I wonder if I can nail him for anything right now. Which is something that after the first time I was arrested, I really had to put up with for a long time. Getting harassed by police just for being me, just for having been arrested once. So, these sort of cyclical pipelines, I believe exist. I have witnessed. I have no proof of, other than, my own firsthand or secondhand experience. Also, I'm not trained as an investigative journalist or an investigator of any kind, so finding that proof is difficult. However, I do feel like getting perspective is at least good. And maybe by sharing this journey of increasing my own perspective, I can help other people gain perspective as well. Another thing that I've always believed and am now finding the proof to back up. You're welcome, Crystal. This is the kind of thing that I wish more people would pay attention to, would do. I wish more people would have this conversation because it's not... I'm not going to say I'm not qualified. I'm not going to say I'm not the right person, but I'm not really the right person to have this conversation. I'm a right person, or I'm not the wrong person, but I'm not the right person. I'm not... There are... In my opinion, there are people who should be taking part in this conversation that aren't. Or if they are, there are also the right people having this conversation in other places. I do have to acknowledge that. I'm not the only one talking about this kind of stuff. And there are other people way more qualified than I doing this. FD Signifier and his friends over on YouTube are having these conversations, and they are way more qualified. Which is part of what gaining perspective is about. part of what getting this this word went away again. This background, this context. Cripes. Just can't hang on to that word. That's what gaining this context is about. It's doing some of the back work to catch up with where others are at the moment. And again, I don't feel like I should be the only person. I feel like more people should be having this conversation. These conversations. You know. That being said, this obviously we are going to deal with some difficult topics today. I will try to have a few moments where I make some jokes, keep it light, but this ain't the comedy stream we usually do. Our pre-rolls brought to you by The Hidden Leaf, downtown Charlottesville, Virginia, 105 West Main Street, on the downtown mall, Suite 200 above the bricks, Suite 200. A great place to go with some great buds to get some great buds. A bud, and the only thing better than their bud is their customer service. And they have the lowest prices in town, according to my own personal, highly biased research. By which I mean I was personally very high when I did my biased research. Don't forget to check the website for times and events. The website is thehiddenleafcville.com. That's thehiddenleafcville, all one word, .com. Where you will find times for events such as Dabs and Drag coming up this 28th of August, this Thursday, which will be amazingly fun. I know this because I will be there. Also, you can find Frosty Fridays, sales event starting on Fridays after 6 o'clock, where you can also find our other two sponsors, Firehouse Craft Cannabis Products, and the Kush Gang, purveyors of fine edibles and drinkables. You know, as I was saying, this is a very socio-politically charged stream. So, I have to preface this by saying any opinions you hear expressed herein belong to me, the channel, the label, and or the expresser of the opinion, but not necessarily to any of our sponsors, including Hidden Leaf, Kush Gang, and Firehouse, because they're businesses. They do not necessarily have political opinions. So with all of this, let us dive in. Yeah, Crystal, I'm hoping it will be fun. I'm thinking I know I'm going in drag. I always do go in drag. So there's that. And there probably will be pictures of me in drag as Dorothy Knight up on Instagram. My Instagram being Trev13. I say the most likely. There may not be pictures of me in drag up there for this event because I'm not sure I'm going to be feeling my full pretty. We'll see how I'm feeling at the time. So, let's discuss this book, Inflamed, Deep Medicine and the Anatomy of Injustice by Rupa Maurya and Raj Patel. This book is looking at the inherent analogy between our bodies and the environments that they inhabit. The environment in which they inhabit, called the exposome, and our bodies, called the biome. While drawing this analogy, this book is also effectively connecting the two, saying as something affects our biome, or as something affects our exposome, so does it affect our biome. And insofar as, we are our biome, the way we interact with the exposome has the chance to will affect our biome. And it's doing so through the mechanism of inflammation, which I find pretty interesting. We are in the section about the endocrine system. Liquid anatomy. Some of the lines in the endocrine system are a little, some of the labels are a little yikes. I even found a line that I found troubling. We're gonna back up a paragraph and get a running start. This is how a damaging exposome creates the wear and tear we see in the bodies of those who are forced to endure it. IL-1 induces insulin-producing cells in the pancreas to make more insulin. But overstimulation can result in the death of those special cells. This suggests one mechanism by which chronic low-grade inflammation could lead to conditions such as diabetes. Not surprisingly, indigenous people who share similar patterns of colonization are transmitting diabetes through the generations. The way in which our exposomes impact our cells are being programmed into our biology. No amount of insulin can reverse this pattern. The exposome must be restructured for health to be a possibility. And we go right into ad. I do understand what's being said there. I believe that this was in the context of the diet, of people's diets. The new normal. When the world is in balance, we are too. But the modern world, in all its structures, is out of balance, leading to bodies that are badly damaged by chronic inflammation. The biological cost in the face of ongoing damage is the allostatic load the body carries. Interesting wording. The biological cost in the face of ongoing damage is the allostatic load the body carries. The abnormality of the modern world makes it incredibly hard for us to get back to a healthy equilibrium. Fast food marketed to us most frequently is unhealthy and contributes to damage that makes it harder to return to health. The air we breathe carries noise and particulate pollution that presents a cognitive and biochemical load for our brains. Living in low-income neighborhood means carrying biomarkers of a higher allostatic load. To be black in the United States is to be confronted with daily acts of discriminations. Sources of stress manifest as higher blood pressure even while we are asleep. Instead of restoration, sleep and melatonin afford, the allostatic load that racism brings effectively leaves black people sleeping with one eye open. Differences in allostatic load are contributing to the disparities between health outcomes for cardiovascular death between black people and white people. Increased allostatic load may explain why people in modern industrial societies develop hypertension as they get older, beginning even in childhood. People in hunter-gatherer agrarian societies don't experience the same age-related hypertension and have lower rates of hypertension altogether. Okay. We also live in a world steeped in industrial chemical noise. Signals from some of the thousands of products of the pesticide, plastics, and manufacturing industries are already interfering with our body's own biochemical conversations. Endocrine disruptors mimic or interfere with our own hormones, leading to a wide range of problems from the developmental disorders to cancer. The disruptors found in everyday products such as children's plastic toys and foods range from bisphenol, a BPA, in canned food lining, to industrial solvents, dioxins, to pesticides and fungicides. One study calculated the economic impacts of industrially manufactured endocrine disruptors in Europe and the United States in 2010. By looking at the range of pathways through which endocrine disruptors are known to cause disease, from testicular cancer to diabetes to loss of IQ, researchers computed the healthcare costs that might be connected with endocrine disruptors. In the United States, that cost was $340 billion, 2.33% of GDP. In the EU, it was $217 billion, 1.28% of GDP. Despite the cataclysmic burden of disease they cause, regulating endocrine disruptors has proven difficult, not least because of the power of the chemical industry. Lobbyists from the European Center for Toxicology and Toxicology of Chemicals, ECETOC, a think tank funded, among others, by Bayer, BASF, Dow, DuPont, and Syngenta, successfully obstructed a range of public health initiatives that might have reined in their profits. One of ECETOC's former experts testified that synthetic EDCs at the present exposure are no risk for human health, especially when compared with the endocrine disruptor that features most often in our diets: sugar. In spite of the evidence that the structures around us are causing these health problems, medicine often treats endocrine conditions as something patients have done to themselves. One of the most troubling and widespread examples is type 2 diabetes. When your body is deficient in insulin or when your cells grow insensitive to it, blood sugar levels can fluctuate harmfully. The possible dire consequence includes blindness, tissue necrosis, cardiovascular disease, and kidney failure. 1 in 11 adults on Earth now has the disease, with the highest concentration in Asia. China and India lead the world with 110 and 70 million cases, respectively. The main drivers are generally poverty, chronic stress, and ultra-processed foods. Predictably, black, indigenous, and other people of color suffer the most from the colonial diet scourge, with higher diabetes rates than settler populations across the world. This happens not by magic, but by design. In the United States, advertising for sugary drinks increased by $1 billion from 2013 to 2018, with black and Latinx youth as the primary targets. I realize that Latinx is not necessarily the preferred nomenclature anymore. When societies do take collective action against food industry, it fights back. Mexico in 2011 had the world's highest per person soda consumption, 163 liters per year. 3 years later, a range of public health activists scored a victory with the passage of a 10% tax on sweetened beverages. The victory made it possible in part because the tax funds were to be used to install water fountains in schools, a remedy that would help low-income and indigenous groups in particular. The projections were that the resulting decrease in consumption would lead to 189.3 thousand fewer cases of diabetes and 18,900 fewer deaths over 10 years. But it would also lead to reduced profits for the soda industry. In 2016, 3 of the leading public health advocates started to receive odd text messages just as they were preparing for a legislative battle to increase the tax Dr. Simone Barquera at the National Institute for Public Health, Angela Alejandro Calvillo of Poder del Consumidor, Consumer Report, and Luis Encarnacion at Coalición Contrapeso were being targeted by military-grade spyware sold by the Israel-based technology firm NSO Group exclusively to governments, according to a detailed investigative report published in the New York Times. Their communication pathways were hacked so that the industrial sugar vendors might do the same to our endocrine systems. To date, no one has been prosecuted. Were this an isolated incident, we might dismiss it as an example of the food industries being unusually powerful in Mexico. Vincent Fox, the Mexican president from 2000 to 2006, was also the president of Coca-Cola Mexico. But endocrine disruptors have been pushed across the planet by industries reluctant to see their sources of profit come second to concerns of human health. The sugar industry, like the tobacco industry, has long been in the business of obfuscating science for profit. It has a history of funding medical conferences and professional association meetings and publications as part of a sophisticated suite of ways to buy off incriminating science. In the EU, the chemical and biotechnology industries fund experts to cast doubt on well-established body of science showing the dangers of endocrine disruptors. I mean, are we surprised that these companies employ lobbyists to protect their profits? It just feels like what goes on. It's wrong, you know. Sure, sugar, it's wrong. But to me anyway, this is no big surprise. Unfortunately, most of this is no big surprise to me. And just corporate greed in general is very much what I expect. You know, and they touched briefly on how your status in America, your citizen status in America, and really across the world, affects that. And something I feel like this channel hasn't touched on, at least not not in the way I feel like maybe I should have, maybe I should do again at some point. Is what exactly, how exactly being black leads to being a second class citizen pretty much everywhere around the world. There is nowhere that is safe from that baked in assumption. And I feel like fearing the black body did a little bit to cover that. Did a decent amount to cover that. I'm not I'm not sure if we have another book up on the horizon that will cover it as much as that did. It seems like, the last couple of books have been very much about the medical profession. But that's understandable. The last book we read, I believe it was called Sickening, it did a lot to touch on second class citizenry of being black and how that affected the medical outcomes. But I feel like maybe there's more we can do there, more we can touch on there. The power of these chemical companies is changing young people's bodies. Hormones control menses. The age at which girls have their first period has been falling across the planet. The reasons range from exposure to endocrine disruptors in hand sanitizer and plastic bottles to the ubiquitous presence of artificial light and increased sugar consumption. These disruptors are social problems, catalysts in the circulation of global capital, but the illness that they cause are increasingly blamed on the individual. That's the other thing here, is this blaming the individual. And that's something I've been thinking about a bunch recently. I I was the other day I was thinking about my my high school earth science teacher. And he was such a strong environmentalist. I mean, he was in his late 20s, and he was out to save the planet, literally. And I remember us, we talked a lot in both in class, and he started an environmental club at the school, environmental protection club, and we did a lot of activities around the school that were sort of this. They were designed to make us take stewardship of the environment around us. And they were also designed to be environmentally helpful, for the school to have these environmental sort of positive impacts. But something we didn't touch on a lot back then, and I don't think we were aware of it so much. And I think maybe he just sort of tickled the edges of the idea of that the responsibility for what was happening to the planet was much larger than the individual. These individual responsibilities taking individual responsibility for your health or taking individual responsibility for the environment, while it's all well and good, it does not necessarily track that it will do anything to help. These problems are systemic. They are system-wide problems. So it doesn't, I mean, you're setting a good example, and it's possible that if everybody followed a good example, that it may shift the dial a little bit, but without changing the underlying system, you will be swimming against the current the entire time, no matter what you do, no matter how much personal responsibility you take. And I know what I'm saying could be interpreted to sound like, well, why do anything? Why take any responsibility? We're not responsible for our lives at all. We're not responsible for what happens to us at all. So why do anything, because it's not gonna fix anything? And to that, I would say, no, we really aren't responsible for our lives at all. Our lives are really being done to us. And telling us to take responsibility for our lives is a way for people in power to tell us to sit down, shut up, and accept what's going to happen to us. However, we also are in charge of our lives. We don't have to sit down, shut up, and take whatever happens to us. We can stand up and be loud about it. We don't have to accept the status quo. We can try to change the system in many ways. There are many, many forms of systemic change that can happen. I'm not claiming to know what will work best, but I do myself have a feeling that systemic change doesn't come without an extreme voicing of feelings of the oppressed. That's where I'm gonna leave that. I'm gonna stop just short of saying violent revolution is the only way to enact change. I'm not saying that. See, this is me not saying violent revolution is the only way to enact change. This is me saying I'm not saying that. It's not that nothing we do matters. It's that if we want what we do to matter, we have to do it very big. Grassroots organizations, grassroots organizing is a way of creating a much larger groundswell of of political voice. And mutual aid is a way of creating a support network so that when recriminations occur for being loud, you have a support network. These things do matter. And in some ways, personal agency very much matters. Who do you choose to spend your money? To whom do you give your capital, your attention, your energy, your time? You know, yeah, it helps if we all recycle and compost. Yes, that'll help. But it's not gonna be careful. Composting isn't gonna reduce the methane emissions enough to slow the greenhouse effect. You know, it would need to be composting on an industrial scale. It would mean composting all of the food waste from all of the grocery stores, all the restaurants, all the fast food restaurants, everywhere. Recycling, for it to be effective, it can't just be, oh, I separate my trash. It needs to be at the industrial level. You know, the idea of single stream recycling seems great. That seems like a systemic solution to a systemic problem. Unfortunately, it's also a lie. Most of what goes, and even individual recycling is kind of a lie. A lot of the stuff that we put in recycling gets shipped to India, China, other developing nations, and then burned. As we covered in a previous chapter. These calls for individual responsibility for the problems we face are a way of ducking systemic responsibility for the problems that have been created, mainly in the name of capitalism. This model can be extrapolated to other things, such as the social constructs that we call tradition. This idea of personal responsibility when people have very little agency because there is so much pressure to follow tradition, so much pressure to be like other people, so much pressure to fit in that it's hard for someone to really claim agency in their life. Especially someone who doesn't fit in. And these are systemic features. These are features of this system designed to grind out as much, extract as much value from each statistic as it can. And by that I mean each one of us is considered a statistic, not a person. You know, we are a quantitative value. Each individual is a quantitative value, and this system is here to extract that value. And that, I think, is the mindset that leads us to the development of second class citizenry. Citizens who, not even citizens, individuals who the citizens don't feel bad about extracting value from, while the system is extracting value from its citizens. It's insidious. The tragedy of the built environment. The allostatic load is greatest where humans have done the most to transform the world around them. Since 2009, for the first time in history, more humans are living in cities than outside of them. I feel like that changed. I feel like that statistic changed. Because of, COVID. More humans living in cities than outside of them, exposed to artificial light and constant noise. Although the global shift from majority rural to majority urban happened only recently, and then unhappened, England and Wales hit that milestone in the 1850s. London's West End night sky was forever changed by a gas lighting system that began to be installed in 1806. No. You'll like it that you can't see the night sky. It's good that you can't see the night sky. The moon makes you crazy. The stars make you insane. It's good that you can't see the night sky. That would be a gaslighting system. Told y'all I'd try to make at least like one joke. Millions of years of evolution had shaped the web of life's circadian rhythms, but it didn't take long for them to be jolted sideways. The impact of artificial light at night was first tracked by an ornithologist who noticed that the same technology that had been used for over a century indoors to make chickens lay more eggs was also affecting undomesticated birds. Comparing finches and other migratory birds inside and outside London's Glow, William Rowan observed that those in a city aviary reproduced earlier than their rural counterparts. The skies haven't just become brighter, the color of night has also changed, from the warm flicker of candles to gas lamps to the orange low-pressure sodium lamps that lit our walks home from school as children, to the white modern LED streetlights that glow of our smartphones and the glow of our smartphones. Our nights are now bluer. This is, as we're learning, the color of light that creatures have evolved to use as a signal for the beginning of the day. When lights are off or yellow warm, the pineal gland will marshal the processes of sleep through melatonin. When blue wavelengths that signal the beginning of the day hit the retina in the eyes, the direct window to our brain, hormone production is dramatically changed. Turn the blue lights on and melatonin levels drop. When rats, hamsters, and salmon are constantly exposed to bright blue lights, they exhibit signs of stress and decreased immune function. Exposure to light, in other words, has an impact not only on individuals but on entire ecosystems. I've always had an easier time falling asleep when there is bluer light shining at me. I don't know why. I don't know what that's about. But it's almost impossible for me to fall asleep. Well, not impossible. It's just harder for me to fall asleep in a dark room than in a room with a TV and some sound. A dark and quiet room is not going to be easy for me to sleep in. But having blue light shining at me seems to put me to sleep better. I don't understand it. But hey, through trial and error, it's something I discovered, and it seems to help me sleep better, so. Also, unconventionally, I sleep better with noise pollution. I sleep better with the sound of traffic. I have to have the radio on, usually and the TV on, just to have enough, like, noise pollution for me to fall asleep to. Nature sounds wake me up. Like, I do not fall asleep listening to crickets at night. The peepers and the crickets, now that keeps me up. It is, I don't know why. I don't know what what that's about, but that is just who I am. And I find it really interesting that I've spent most of my life in a more rural setting than in an urban setting. So most of my life, my sleep has been not the greatest. Just as light causes changes in the endocrine system, so too does noise. Tree frogs, which have evolved so that the loudest are the most attractive, have had their romances upended by traffic noise. This background noise has profound effects on humans, disrupting sleep and producing knock on endocrine disruptors that can activate the stress response, causing a rise in circulating cortisol and adrenaline. Activated stress leads to inflammation, which can in turn upset the endocrine system, a dangerous feedback loop. A 10 decibel increase in road traffic noise 5 years before diagnosis can lead to a 1% increase in diabetes for those within earshot. A noise level uh, consonant with good sleep is 40 decibels. Any louder is disruptive. Huh. I don't think they mean to use consonant there. Consistent. Consistent with good sleep. A noise level consistent with good sleep is 40 decibels. Any louder is disruptive. One study found that in the United States, noise levels in areas with 75% black residents average 46.3 decibels, whereas those with zero black residents average 42.3 decibels. The problem is worldwide. In one Indian city's silence zone, ambient bedroom noise levels range between 65 and 75 decibels, and that's typical across all India's cities. All this noise around and 24/7 illumination would seem to suggest that cities are hubs of social activity, but the promise of more social connection in the bright lights and big city is not borne out. In fact, a sense of loneliness in cities is common even though rural spaces afford more opportunity for social distances. Residents of cities experience higher rates of social isolation, an experience that was dramatically heightened during the COVID quarantines when millions of people isolated themselves from friends, family, colleagues, and neighbors. Quarantine self isolation is an extreme situation, but it reveals something essential about the nature of our urban environments. For the first time in human history, an unprecedented level of people are living alone for an extended period of time, a trend seen most starkly in cities. The paradox of loneliness in the midst of a crowd defines life in urban environments where people do not have adequate paths and time to build authentic relationships with one another, in third spaces that are neither homes nor workplaces. Forging community is more challenging in urban spaces that are not designed for people to gather and encounter one another. Although we can exist as individuals completely on our own, it appears we cannot thrive. Humans evolved to live as social animals, constantly exposed to one another and very rarely alone. It has been suggested that the subjective feeling of loneliness is an adaptive trait, a kind of warning signal that our web of social interactions has become unhealthily frayed. The impact of urban loneliness on our health is seen in how cities are associated with 40% more depression and 20% more anxiety than rural spaces, as well as double the rates of schizophrenia. Social isolation is associated with elevated rates of cardiovascular disease, dementia, and mortality. When early humans were separated from their tribes, whether by rite of passage, the need to hide from enemies, or an accident, it was a temporary condition. Nowadays, we're steeping permanently in the long-term chemistry of social isolation. The activation of HPA axis on the downstream inflammation that the stress response creates, our environment, our built environment is designed intentionally or not to cause depression, cognitive decline, dementia, and other illness, all mediated by inflammatory cytokines. Feeling of isolation create a vicious feelings of isolation. Let me try that again in just a moment. All right. Feelings of isolation create a vicious cycle between body and the environment. In cities, people have more access to the kinds of foods that will provide both a short-term uplift and a longer-term predisposition to diabetes. A full spectrum of products exploit the disruptions of modern life to help us cope with this stress to make us temporarily less unhappy. No kidding. And to hook us with a promised return to some imagined state of bliss. The physical environment drives us through anxiety and opportunity to the kinds of behaviors that generate more inflammation: overeating, drug use, and self-isolation. It's easy to call out drug use. But dang it, if you don't have the perspective and the context, be gentle with it. It's really easy to sit there and say, if your built environment were just different, you wouldn't use drugs, or you wouldn't have used drugs. You wouldn't have I mean, yeah, of course. If our built environments were different, but they weren't. I don't know where that reaction's necessarily coming from, but I feel like, oh, and to some degree, I also agree, because it's like, yeah, you know, people who do drugs is not always really a choice. They're not really choosing it. It's just part of the equation of their life. It's not, you know, I mean, they're acknowledging that it is to help deal with the cognitive dissonance and the physical the built environment, I guess. But it's, I guess there's a bit of like, I feel like people brush past that easily. Um, and I feel like there is, I, I feel like there's a demonization of marijuana still. That marijuana is still seen as a drug. And that, I feel like, not just feel like, I mean, I've had people invalidate the hard work I've done getting off of drugs, getting off of real drugs, by saying, oh, but you're still smoking weed. Had a stand-up comedian do that from stage, to which the host of the show said, no, you don't know what he was like before. This is sober. Trust me. You know, it felt a little like, and I wasn't going to ruin that comedian's day by being like, by calling them out for being insensitive about how hard it is to quit drugs. But I also, and you know, the host stepping up for me, you know, that was nice. But it did feel a little dismissive. A little more than a little dismissive. And that's something that I wrestle with a lot. And that's kind of what I read into that passage, that line. That's why I felt dismissed by that line, was because people do, society still does, dismiss all of the hard work I've done to stop doing hard drugs, to stop drinking. They can dismiss all of that by saying, "Oh, but you still smoke weed. You're still a drug addict. You're still addled. You're still not in your right mind or your right emotional state. You're not, you know, you're not sober." And, you know, when people do that, I wonder how do they know what sober is? How do they know what sober is for me? And if I'm supposed to be sober, does this also include that I shouldn't be on any prescribed, you know, psych meds? I got off of the prescribed psych meds because of the side effects they were having. And I felt like, you know, they got me over the initial hump of being able to at least accept depression and work through it. And then, you know, but what is sober? Sober for me so far has been a very dark and unpleasant place, full of physical, emotional pain. Like, so because I'm either built that way or molded that way, that means I should go through that? Like, I have to just live in that place, people who say just be sober, I feel like don't know what pain is. People who believe that not doing drugs is a choice, I think, don't understand the complexity of the human experience and don't understand pain, emotional or physical. It's very... So when a writer tosses in a line about, doing drugs, that felt that felt very much like blaming the individual. That felt very much, yeah, I felt very much like blaming the individual for a systemic problem. And it feels very much like blaming an individual for a systemic problem. It's something I think we need to be more cognizant of, on the whole, is how to not blame individuals for systemic problems. I feel like we are very much in this mindset. This is where this rugged individualism. This is another place where this rugged individualism and this stoicism are really damaging us. All right, let's get back to it. Feelings of isolation create a vicious cycle between the body and the environment. In cities, people have more access to the kinds of foods that will provide both a short-term uplift and a long-term predisposition to diabetes. A full spectrum of products exploit the disruptions of modern life to help us cope with this stress. Got through that already. Chronic stress makes the body vulnerable to addiction. Increasing levels of emotional stress causes decreased impulse control, and the more chronic the stress becomes, the more maladaptive the behavior becomes. Chronic stress dampens activity in the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for rational decision making and self control, and heightens activity in the limbic system, which includes the amygdala, an ancient center of the brain that guides impulsive behavior. Global industries intuitively understand this connection between the endocrine system and the nervous system, encouraging addiction and overconsumption as a path to happiness and a dynamic that David Cartwright calls limbic capitalism. All right, so maybe they take a completely different tack than what I was reading into it in the first sentence. I can be wrong. That is totally possible. And maybe it's just hard to hear it in clinical terms. Maybe it's hard to hear my personal experience, such an emotional experience, reduced to, and so concisely reduced to a paragraph of clinical terms. Uh, it is, like I said, it can be hard. There is some real emotional reaction to this. Uh, you know, I want to believe that I have some agency in making the decisions about doing drugs. But as I just said, I don't. I don't think I do. I don't have a lot of agency here. I could I mean, there's always a choice. But when the options are bad and worse, is there really a choice? You know? As Facebook co founder Sean Parker explained, social media are engineered to hijack our need for social connection, offering a little dopamine hit to the reward centers of the brain through likes, retweets, and views. This is not exactly an accurate description of the complex neurobiology at play, but it is a fair assessment of how Facebook keeps us coming back for more. A string of epidemiological studies has connected early life exposure to stress or trauma with addictive behavior. No kidding. You don't say. I could have a heart attack and die of not surprise. I might as well highlight it though. A string of epidemiological studies has connected early life exposure to stress or trauma with addictive behavior through the activation of the HPA axis, the endocrine superhighway that is intimately connected with the nervous system. Unsurprisingly, inflammation plays a role. Drugs such as opiates and alcohol induce the expression of a transcription factor that turns on the genes that make inflammatory cytokines in the brain and inflammatory targets such as opioid receptors. This transcription factor plays a central role in inflammatory response and also mediates complex behaviors involved in drug reward, learning, stress response, and depression. These systems are interconnected on the molecular level and provide a possible framework to understand how opiate addiction modulates the stress response, leading to more inflammation. These drugs and the story of fever itself reveal, systems that were once considered separate are in fact tightly bound together, as we saw above. IL-1 was understood as a hormone known as an endo, endogenous pyrogen before it was relabeled a cytokine, a feature of the immune system. All these chemical signals keep the nervous system, the immune system, and the endocrine system tightly interwoven in a constant communication as they respond to our environment, interact with organisms inside and around us, and optimize our readiness for the challenges ahead. Next week, we will do the opposite of stress. And possibly a political anatomy. And finish up the endocrine system. But that's where we are going to call it in today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you, Just Me Crystal. Good to see you here. Much love to you, lurkers. And stick around for the raid. I don't know who we will be raiding out to, but we will be raiding out to someone. And now is the time on the show when I say, as they say around here, 2 up, 2 down, VA, double deuces. I'm out, y'all.